So I recognize familiar faces. Rick, Stuart, uh, Chris is there, Teddy, and Rebecca. This is really a conversation. And to the extent of that, I mean, there were even a couple follow-up questions that I told people I would answer right now from last week. And it's recorded and it'll be transcribed, so it can go up for benefit of the people in the group. One of the questions last week was about blogs and where they ought to sit and what the domain names would be. So their firm was putting up a series of blogs. They didn't know whether to put them in their website or have them as independent publications. And if so, what the domains would be. Do you put the domain of the firm name in it or what you do? And, the answer to that, as far as my preference would be, you'd have a blog, be like the title of a magazine. If it was Sports Illustrated, it would sit on the domain name sportsillustrated.com. It wouldn't sit at, Time Warner / Sports Illustrated type of thing. So you just get separate domains. And you don't have a problem getting them because all you got to do is add the term blog, insider, insights, Tribune, anything. You just go to Wikipedia and look up, the name of the publications. But that was one of the questions from last week. I can get to the other one later. On social media, I know that Stuart uses social. I know that Rick Georges uses social. And for the other folks here and people that will pick it up by virtue of recording, it used to be you could just blog and people would hear you. There was no such thing as social media. There was no Twitter. There was no LinkedIn. There was no Facebook. There was no anything. In fact, it used to be that if I mentioned Seth Godin, a leading marketer or speaker, it would show up as something called a trackback in the footer of his blog. And believe it or not, be like 80 people would show up from a link on Seth Godin's blog where he might have 100 links. People would go over and see what Kevin O'Keefe said about Seth Godin's blog. And Seth Godin could see that I wrote about him, and next thing you know, we're exchanging notes. But we didn't do anything. The technology was set up that RSS, which is real simple syndication, invented by Dave Weiner, one of the first bloggers, if not the first inventor of blogging, made it so it was like sending out a radio signal. And the people that had a way to receive it could see that you said something. They'd see something if you said something about them. They might have had a news aggregator. We use news aggregators because it was like having a radio on our desk. If somebody mentioned our name, we could hear it. And so you had this conversation taking place that nobody else could hear. Because they're sitting there publishing a website, and they don't know that when we publish a website, other people hear what we say, which is an amazing concept. Because I'm sitting in my garage, and I'm realizing, I'm broadcasting like a ham radio, and all the other people that have ham radio stations can hear me, and I'm building my reputation as a leader on the use of networking through the internet. But other people can't even understand that this is going on. They're building websites that aren't broadcasting, and so it's kind of funny when I think back on it, because LexBlog did a lot of business by just going to people and explaining to them, do you realize your site doesn't broadcast a signal? It'd be like having a radio station and not sending anything out. People couldn't get it, where other people had a radio station and other people could get it on their radios. That's all changed. Just writing something on a blog isn't necessarily going to get heard. It might, because people are going to do searches. And when you're doing it on a niche subject, Stuart's writing on green issues, construction and building, you might be the only person in the world writing on that issue on a niche, and somebody's going to see it on a search as they research for information. But not everybody gets seen. And today, you really need to go where people are. And they might be on Facebook, they might be on LinkedIn, they might be on Twitter, they might be on Instagram, they might be in Clubhouse. And one thing that's real important to understand as a lawyer, you don't get to decide where your people are. It's not that long ago. I was at a conference. I know years go fast now, but I'm with these so-called experts in legal, and we're going to talk about social media in front of a pretty prestigious group of lawyers. And we're meeting ahead of time, and they go, well, we don't need to talk about Twitter because nobody would use Twitter and none of our clients would use Twitter, and it really is kind of silly. So let's skip that. And I said, whoa, wait a second. And I messaged the assistant general counsel of Microsoft, and asked him. I said, these people don't think, these lawyers don't think Twitter's very important. And he goes, well, I'm in a meeting right now, And I met him via Twitter, and he goes, I'm at a meeting right now, but here's a link to an article I wrote for Forbes on the importance of Twitter for general counsel and lawyers that are interfacing with general counsel at Microsoft. And I shared it with those guys. So then they backtrack and they say, okay, we'll talk about it. So there's a perfect example. They're sitting there as the high and mighty. Hey, we're lawyers. We don't use this Twitter thing. We heard it's silly, so we're not even going to deal with it. And we feel really good about saying, oh, we don't do that. That's too silly for us. Some like they get a badge for that as opposed to looking stupid. And here they're going to go up and teach other lawyers how to be stupid. So that's still going on today. I don't know that Clubhouse is going to be something or not something, but I didn't know if Twitter was going to be something or not something. But any number of people I've talked to in the last 2 weeks have laughed off Clubhouse and said, well, obviously it's the dumbest thing you ever heard. And I said, well, I don't know. I can listen to Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz at 11 o'clock at night, have a discussion with other people. And I didn't get that before. Mark Andreessen invented the first browser in Netscape, and he's done a lot of major investments in the Silicon Valley. And they're talking about starting companies and answering questions in regard to that. That's pretty interesting. Now there's lawyers actually using the thing. As far as the importance of social media, there's a great report from the New York Times, and we'll get the link of it up. Michelle can share it in just a few highlight notes in the LinkedIn blogging group. But it's the innovation in publishing. I think it's 2014. And what they talked about was the importance of individual reporters, among other things. They talked about in developing social media relationships, because the days when the New York Times could drive their trucks around and put the newspapers in the boxes around New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and places they reached, without printing in other cities, were over. And the days that they could just be online and expect people to subscribe, which they've done a good job of now, those weren't there. But if a reporter could be out using social media and build relationships of trust, then people would share their stories. So now information was moving socially. It's moving person to person. In the past, that might have moved because somebody clipped an article out of a magazine and said, hey, share this with folks. Or if I have my assistant send it out and I send a note, and I tell them why. But it's really important to move information. It also builds incredible trust, credibility, and a real self. Lawyers are not looked at very highly. Just in a society we're not. And lawyers have the good fortune, those that have done a good job over the lifetime in building relationships with people, demonstrating their skill, their expertise, and their care. They've developed a good practice, and they've done well for themselves over a lifetime. But a lot of people haven't done that. They haven't developed that trust. They haven't developed credibility, and they really weren't taught how to do that. And they're not going to be taught. The idea that everybody talks about the law schools need to teach law students how to, do business development. It's kind of silly. I mean, you're not going to sit there and say, hey, you're going to have to learn to be yourself. You're going to have to learn to be authentic. You're going to have to learn to talk to other people. You're going to have to listen to other people. You're going to have to go to events. You're going to have to use these things. And the problem with that is that all the people at the law school have never done that. So I don't know how they teach it anyway. But so the lawyers are going to have to learn this, on their own. And the social media that I use, and I think they're all important, and some I use better than others, and some I'm not always using as well as I should, are Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Anybody can ask any questions at any time. This is kind of a conversation, but I'll sit and talk for as long as I need to share what I think might be helpful. I have used, hey, Rick, what do you got? We can't hear you.
You are muted.
How about now?
Yeah, you're here now.
All right. Yeah, just a quick one. I also use Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn primarily.
Right.
But I have another question. What do you do when, first of all, I'm a solo practitioner. I don't do politics on my website. I don't do politics even in person. I'm an apolitical person. But I get clients of every political stripe. The question is, if there is an alternative site like Gab set up, and there are a lot of people there with green money, And I am posting all of my blog posts there, and they want a lawyer. I'm not going to turn them down.
All right.
Because of their political beliefs. That's my one political thing is I believe in absolute free speech. You know, if you want to be the biggest jerk in the world and say whatever you're going to say, that's your right. What do you think about using those alternative sites and the other social media sites? And it could go both ways to build a practice or to develop your practice.
Yeah, ultimately, I think a lot of it comes down to what you're comfortable with. Because that's what I've always told people. There's where's your comfort level? What do you think it's doing for you? Because I would probably feel the same way as you. Until I got involved in some local politics in Wisconsin, I thought that everybody should stand up and say what they thought was right and get involved with political causes. Until people go through your garbage and chase you around when you're out to eat and things like that. Found out it's not so fun, but. My gut would be whatever you feel comfortable doing. And when I say comfortable, I don't mean like, well, gee, that's a bad thing to be doing. And so you do it because you're comfortable with it. I just mean if that feels comfortable to you and, you're sharing things that might be helpful to people, I think that's fine. I really think, I ultimately thought, I used to think was, what value am I adding to the conversation? Am I spamming the conversation or am I adding value? Am I looking for eyeballs, or am I sharing things that could be of value, to people? And Rick, you share just a lot of different stuff. You'll see something and you'll share it. So to some extent, you're like you can be like an AP reporter. I saw this over here. I saw this over here. I saw this over here, and you add a quick comment on it, and that can be of value to people. Because it's almost like when we used to listen to AM radio and they used to get clipping services and then share things beyond beyond UPI or Associated Press and whatnot. So I think it's fine. I tend to focus on how do I get the number of influencers that are really active out there. So I'll give you an example with Twitter. I started using Twitter when Robert Scoble, who might have still been at Microsoft then as an evangelizer and influencer. It was basically, he helped the developers begin to network and blog and give them a face when they were called the evil empire. And it worked because the developers started to build a reputation with people that bought Microsoft products. And one night I saw that he mentioned if you want to track the I don't know what the machines are that monitor earthquakes in China, here's the site. And I go, what the hell is Robert sharing that for on Twitter at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night? And so I realized then he goes, go to this site called such and such, which was a Twitter search then. Twitter didn't have a search. I just put in, and he goes, put in the word earthquake. I put in the word earthquake, and I'm seeing people in China under desks from a huge earthquake that just took place. And then somebody says, this was an earthquake of 8 point something. And I'm telling my kids, if this is true, this is going to be a lot of people killed, injured, catastrophic. Well, it's not on TV. I'm turning on CNN. There's nothing. And I'm getting reports on this Twitter thing. So at that point in time, I realized, okay, this is something. I don't know what it is, but this is not nothing. And then as I started to play around with it, I think it was the same year on a Saturday morning, I heard that there was whether you want to call them skirmishes or wars breaking out between Israel and Palestinians, and Israel was dropping bombs in Palestine. So at that time there was a search allowed you to do a search by 1 mile of a certain location. So I could look up a city in the West Bank, or 1 kilometer or 5 kilometers. Okay, show me what's being tweeted 1 kilometer from this city in the West Bank. Again, pictures, rubble, people talking about it. And I go on Twitter and I say, I'm going to go to Tel Aviv and see what the difference is between people in the West Bank talking about this issue and people talking about the issue in Tel Aviv. And a person in the West Bank said, Kevin, you don't need to go to Tel Aviv to find out what's going on. I'm pulling bodies out here right now. And I'm sitting in the coffee shop wanting to tell people, I just want to tell you guys that I am talking to people in the West Bank via this thing called Twitter. Maybe you heard about it, maybe you didn't. And the last one I'll share with you, we just went over the top, was when the guerrillas took people hostage in Mumbai, X number of years ago. I think it was on Thanksgiving Eve. And so I just did the same thing, Mumbai, X kilometers. And it was a 30-minute news delay because the government in India did not want the guerrillas to know what was going on as far as the government coming after them. So I'm seeing pictures, from people in their condominiums. I'm seeing pictures of people hunkered down. And then they're talking about the people being held hostage in a Jewish center in one area. So I got the name of it. So I just searched the Jewish center, the 1 mile. Now I'm watching people rappel out of a helicopter onto the top of it, soldiers. But the TV doesn't have this, but I have Twitter. So what I know is I'm not using Twitter as for much as, for my work or business or anything. All I know is that this is an unfettered, use of personal relationship, personal communication worldwide. And it's been reined in a little bit as far as what they allow you to get in the data. Because by the end of that year, what we did by the Christmas after that Thanksgiving, Flexblog put up a Twitter feed that showed all the lawyers that use Twitter, so we could see their tweets. And then in a tile, we could see who had the most followers. We just wanted to see by influence. We just guessed it could be that. And the lawyers poured on. And then American Lawyer Media in New York said, we would like you to come and put on a program on this Twitter thing, because it looks like it's something. That's not that long ago that all was going on. We're not talking more than maybe 10 years ago. The telephone maybe not came on that fast. When telephone was invented in the case of lawyers, it was an ethical conversation as to whether they could talk about the law with clients over a telephone, because it wasn't secure. And if they were going to use telephones, it was only going to be the associates, and it was going to be in the back room so that their clients couldn't see that anybody was using the telephone because it was too silly. The telephone is how lawyers made their money, over time. What I do with Twitter is, or what I did with Twitter that allowed me to have more influence than a lot of people, I set up a news reader, a news aggregator, and I use Feedly now. And with Feedly, hooked into another application called, oh my gosh, Michelle, I'm losing my mind here. The application allows me to space my tweets, Buffer. What I can do is I can take an article that I'm reading, get the money quote, and Feedly will even highlight the money quote many times. So I'm reading the piece, it's interesting, and I can highlight that, and now I've copied it and push a button and say, share that through Buffer. And then I can put the person's Twitter handle in it that is either the subject or the source for that article, and have it shared on Twitter through this thing called Buffer. So if I'm reading at 11 o'clock at night, which is 2 a.m. East Coast time, it's not worthwhile to put it out then. In fact, some friends told me one time, they said, you're sharing some really good stuff, but at 1 a.m, I'm not sure how many people are sharing it. Why don't you time it? And I said, well, no, I like to be there. I like to feel that I'm there when people are there. It didn't make a lot of sense because people weren't seeing the things. But what I was doing was I was listening to the right people that I could learn from. And so what I mean by that is, are there particular publications? Are there particular blogs? What have you? What are the people that I learn from that are also influencers of the outside world? And I also listen to subjects, because Feedly will allow me to listen to words, phrases, anything. And I just put them into a folder. And I can have a folder called the A list, the law list, or different things like that. And when I'm on my stride, I am sharing those things. And the person's Twitter handle is in there, either because they said something inside this story, or they were quoted, or they were the source of the story, they were the reporter, the blogger, what have you. And what happens is they see it. And so what they know is that a lot of people are seeing what I'm sharing. My audience also started to grow geometrically, because they were realizing that Kevin O'Keefe was listening to a certain subset of the internet that related to networking through the internet as a legal professional, blogging, social media, and what have you. He was also reading things relating to publishing around the law and what the future of publishing in the law would be. So it was kind of a little feed on that issue. So people liked that and they got it. As a result of that, it allowed me to meet the people in Twitter that I was citing. They thanked me. We may have connected on LinkedIn. I was meeting reporters. I made a reporter at the New York Times. My blog posts then that I shared in Twitter, they had a lot of people that were going to share it because I was sharing 20 things as opposed to 20 of my things and none of anybody else's. I was watching law firms and lawyers just share their stuff. Like they thought Twitter was like, going into a room with a bullhorn and just shouting. And they didn't know how stupid they looked. But if I shared other people's things and then I shared my own, I had some street cred. I would say Twitter did more to grow my reputation and relationships than just about anything because of that and the people that I met, which is pretty amazing. And then I started to meet pockets of people that used it very strategically. There's one of the leading corporate governance lawyers, so he says I know more about what's going on in certain boardrooms than anybody in the country, and I can't remember his name right now. I was on a program with him in New York. He exclusively used Twitter as his way to network on the internet because he could listen to people that were serving on boards. He could listen to corporate Twitter handles. He could just listen in, right, what was going on, and then he could engage. So he could share information that would be helpful to these people, and they're following him. So you could just be sitting there with his iPhone on a table during a conference networking with people. Now, here the people in the audience are thinking, there's no way he would be using something as silly as Twitter. Or he'd be laughing at them thinking, I've got this secret and you guys don't use it. So my competition that wants the work that I'm getting, they don't know how to do this type of thing. So I still use Twitter that way. Where Twitter has changed, just as my observation, I think it's changing for the better because there's so many more people on there. But you got to do certain things because of all the noise. If you're following certain people, and I follow a ton, but it doesn't mean I see their stuff because I just don't follow the Twitter feed going right down. I have certain alerts set up for certain people. So if they tweet, it'll bubble up on the top, and then I do it all on my iPhone or iPad. I see their little avatar across the top. I look at their tweets, and in 280 words, you can put out a little mini blog post. So I can retweet with a quote. And so I've read what they've said and entered into the conversation. And that is big. You've entered into the conversation. So if I put out something last week that says, does anybody know if there's a list of pro bono or access to justice blogs? I'd like, to see it. Well, immediately there was, the former editor of the ABA Journal, professor at Vanderbilt, person working on innovation at the ABA, and then a phenomenal guy, a tech entrepreneur that's built access to justice solutions and reports on it. All of a sudden, they're talking about it. And all of a sudden, he puts together a list within 7 days. And it says, is there anybody else out there that wants to get on here? That to get into that conversation and those influencers by us kind of joining in a conversation, this thread on Twitter and talking above by replying with a quote or retweeting with a quote to carry that on in a very short period of time, it'd be hard to recreate that in any other way. So I think that's one thing that's changed is retweeting, with a quote, not just to retweet. Loving, hitting the like button. It's okay, but people like me are saying, well, that's kind of a squirrely way of saying you like it, but you don't want to come out and say you like it. Or you just want to say, I want to give you a hug. I think retweet the things, share things so that the issue can go on. I think Twitter lists are real worthwhile. And people, it's really an underused thing, including by me, because what you can do is just say, okay, I'm going to create a Twitter list. It's right there in your settings. Call it anything you want to. Call it legal tech in Africa, and then just do some searches on legal tech in Africa, and or just even do a search in Twitter at African legal tech, and you'll see something. Go and look and see who they're following. Now you create that list. What happens? You go and you look up those people's Twitter handles, you say add to a list. Every one of them gets a note from Twitter. You think about how powerful that is. Twitter just wanted to let you know that Kevin O'Keefe just added you to a Twitter list with these other leading people on this subject. So you could be sitting anywhere in the world and say, I want to put together a room of people that could get to know each other. And that I was the one that facilitated that. But I didn't do anything other than just sit at my iPhone and put together this list. You can then open that list at any time and see the content, not just the people, and retweet it with a comment. So think what you're doing. You're reaching people that you could never have reached. So you could be, Stuart could be sitting there saying, okay, who are the leading, people that the developers, regulators, whatever. I'm going to throw them in here. Now, maybe only 20% of those people use Twitter. So what? They're the influencers, and you're throwing them in a list. When you see things that are interesting, and because you have influence, you're doing them a favor by sharing it with a quote from you about what your take was on that. And what they're loving is the fact that these other people, might see it. It's this list. What you will find is other people will begin to subscribe to it. And that's when you know, okay, this is interesting. So I created one on international legal tech because I just want to see what other countries were doing. We're so parochial in the United States, like we know everything. Well, we don't, and we're not the largest country. And our need for legal tech may not even be as great as other countries which don't have the legal history that we have and the judicial system that we have. It's really been fascinating to watch that. And I haven't done as much with it as I should, but it's a great way, for me to build relationships. I can create one on pro bono. Now, how do you learn to do this stuff? I mean, the first time I did it was I was watching the Indianapolis 500 from my family room. And I go, can I find people that are tweeting from the Speedway? And by doing searches, yes, I did. And could I find reporters and whatever? And then I found out that the crews use Twitter. So the crews in the pits are using Twitter, and people thought that I was there because I'm tweeting this stuff. They go, "Are you at the race?" And I said, "No, I'm just listening to us being tweeted." And then somebody said, "Well, this." I remember the TV, the person doing the broadcast said, "This looks like this driver's going to win." And I go, "Well, he can't because his crew is going to have to call him in with 2 laps to go for fuel. They just said it on Twitter." And you're realizing this is too inside story. But I was able to do that by just creating a Twitter list. So for your lawyers that, for anybody that maybe doesn't want to get out there in different types of ways, just use it as a listening tool, because by listening, you then get in and build the relationship. I'll jump to Facebook before LinkedIn. I use Facebook a lot, and if you went back in my posts on my blog, you'd see some posts about how dumb Facebook is and it's not professional and lawyers really don't need to waste their time on it. It's craziness and personal, and why would you hang out there? It's kind of funny when I read it now. And I would say it's kind of this in every community physically. So I mean, town or city or whatever. People get their work, the best people do, by people that know people and they trust people, and the word gets around that there's somebody that you can trust. And then really that's all we want. If somebody's going to go buy a car someplace and they say, you can trust this person, well, you'll drive across town and it's supposed to the closest one to go talk to them. You don't really even know why you should, but you're told to trust them. And that's what Facebook is. It's getting to know people. And it doesn't matter if it's in a town or if it's across the country or across the world. And then the more you use it, the more valuable it becomes. If you don't use it, it's not so valuable, because you got to teach Facebook how to help you. And the more you use it, it gets to know what your interests are, what you like talking about, what the people are, who the people are that may have a similar interest, and they'll put their information in front of you. I'm old enough to be amazed at small things, but to open up Facebook in the morning, and see something from somebody that's just right on point that I wouldn't have wanted to miss in their life, and it could be a business associate. That's really important to me. because I couldn't know that any other way. And there's some things that are personal in nature that aren't business in nature that are more important from a business standpoint than business things. And it's the same thing in real life. If one of your clients has a major health issue, you'd like to know about it, but they're probably not going to call you up. And so some people respond to me on Facebook and they say, well, why is it important to know that? I said, well, in my life I always wanted to care for the people that were clients, business associates, friends, whatnot. And if I don't know what's going on in their lives, I'm not sure I can care for them or can help them in any capacity. Well, Facebook does that for me. And so I know people as a result of it. We can get you a list of people that, Rick uses all the time. He's a good example. But the people that come to mind, and I was thinking, off the top of my head, I wasn't coming up with women examples who are women, but I'm sure there's some that I'm missing. But I look at Ian Balloon. He's one of the leading IP litigation lawyers in the world. For in the world, in a major firm, Greenberg Traurig. I mean, he is on Facebook talking business. He'll be sharing pictures of his girls and his wife, on the beach in California, of Christmas, business associates at a conference, and we used to get together at conferences. He's a real personality. Russell Jackson, used to be at Skadden Arps, one of the leading mass torts lawyers in the United States. Now moved to St. Louis with his partner. I mean, me sharing, he might share, a business issue or corporate issue, not too much on the law, but what's important for him is that people know that they got a new dog that's chasing the bigger dog around the dining room last night. And he's just, it's Russell. I learned that, that he liked bourbon via Facebook. Or I think I ended up going to his house in St. Louis so I said I wanted to taste bourbon. And then he confessed that it was actually his friend that knew all about bourbon. He just got information from him. Well, that and then he brings business to us because we know each other. Danny Schwartz in Connecticut. He's representing large employers on everybody knows Danny. And they know him based on what he does as an employment lawyer, but they know that he's got 3 kids. We appreciate very much. They go on vacations. They might have a picture of him, at an ABA conference and how proud he is of being on a certain committee or being recognized in some way. It makes you get goosebumps. Now, because I engage in that world, I see things that other people don't. And I use Facebook to the extent that when it comes up and it says, Kevin, these might be suggested friends for you, I'll look at them. And anybody that has 40 mutual friends that's a man, or anybody that has 30 mutual friends that's a woman, I look at who they are. And I look at how often they post. And I ask myself, will this person add value to my life? Not because I'm going to see every post that they share, because Facebook can give me one of 1,500 different versions when I open it up of my Facebook based on what people are seeing. But I get value from that. Because if I open my Facebook this morning and the person that's the first post is a video from, I think her name is Lee Woodruff. I'm trying to think of her husband's name was Rob, the person that got part of his head blown off in Iraq, reporting for ABC News. And he's phenomenal on Facebook in what he shares around the world. And so is his wife. And his wife has different, interests. And so she's on there saying, these are the 5 books I'd be reading right now. One of which was, doing good by building a business, and the story of this person that I'd never heard of before. So I'm reading this, and what do? I order the book. And it sounds like it's a great story of this person and what they did over their lifetime. And I'm sitting there thinking, I can't believe I never heard of this person. Well, without Lee sharing that and giving her, that information, I wouldn't have that value brought to my life. And I find things there that inspire me as well. So when other people say, well, you should be reading a book, shouldn't be using Facebook, it should be, I find Facebook really valuable for that. And then I look for those people that are active on there. And the other thing to keep in mind, as legal professionals, certain people are going to have tremendous niches. I mean, I can see Stuart's face on here. I know his background. He's going to get known anywhere by what he does. And people are going to do searches and they're going to hear about him. And it didn't come overnight. He had to work at it. And he published, on his blog a long time to build that reputation, help build that reputation too. But if you're looking to say, well, I don't need to have every client in my city, because you're not going to get them anyway. But if you had a big circle and you said, well, all the lawyers are competing for the people in this circle, so I'm just going to jump right in there with the rest of them and try to do something better. I mean, when you really think about how stupid it is, it really is. Then you go to your website developer and say, should we use blue? Should we use green? Should we use our pictures over here? If we use these magic words, we'll click on our profile, and everybody else is doing the same damn thing for lots of money. But what if you said, well, I'm going to get down here, the size of a dime, and you said, I'm going to get good at that. And I'm going to go to where the people are that are also good at that. I moved outside Seattle to the suburbs. Whether I'll stay in the suburbs, I don't know, because I've never lived in the suburbs before, and it is markedly different in all respects. But one way that this place communicates is with a Facebook group, and they communicate on everything. I need somebody to be a part-time nanny. It snowed out here this week, which is pretty rare. I'm going down and getting food. Does anybody need anything? I will pick it up and bring it to your house. Does anybody know the best people that do this or that? It's not lost on anybody that people are curious. They look at who these people are. They go to the about info. Who are these people? One night one night I just went on there and I asked some question about the vaccine, or I know I shared information. I said, here's what I found out. And then I realized somebody that's just living right above me is an entrepreneur that's done 2 or 3 startups in medical field. And he's detailing it, and I'm going, holy cow. These people know the gift that they have. Well, think of among, where I am, and then a area below me has 19,000 people. Imagine if you just were participating in that. It doesn't mean you need to go browse. Every time you open your iPhone, if there's something worthwhile, it'll bring it to the top anyway. And if you had something to offer, you don't have to say, hello, this is Kevin O'Keefe. I'm a lawyer. I do this type of work, and I'll now answer this question. That would be dumb. You just offer some assistance. People will get around to knowing who you are. You couldn't do better than that. I mean, a lot of people got work from going to high school football games, watching their kids. And they were very afraid that the work was going to dry up when their kids graduate from high school, because that was the leading source. They sat with other parents and things got known because they lived in an affluent area of Seattle. This is way better than that. So what you're doing is you're competing in an area which there isn't any other people competing, because the other lawyers, what they're doing is they are worried about all the other things people that tell them they should be worried about. And I think this applies to any lawyer, any subject, any type of clientele, because oftentimes the lawyers are living in more affluent areas, living in nicer areas. So wherever that Facebook group is, it has affluent clients, investors, bankers, company leaders, nonprofit leaders. Pretty amazing. Investors. It's a gift to really think about Facebook in that regard. I don't know if anybody has any questions about Facebook. I'm happy to take anything.
Back on the topic of trust, Teddy Snyder actually had a question just specifically on Twitter and building your trust and reputation. If you have any suggestions for getting like a blue check certification on Twitter, so people know that.
Getting a what? The certification or the
blue check mark certification.
They're doing, in the beginning, there used to be a way that you could apply, and then there was not. Even they'd say, don't contact us. There's some discussion recently. They're going to have a process where you can go about and getting it. I don't know when that's going to kick in. But there's going to be the ability where they're going to allow people to recognize that. Personally, people used to tell me, well, you got to get verified. And that's why, because I'm hanging out with people that know me on Twitter, and nobody's using Kevin O'Keefe to try to. Now, if you got a name that is common as somebody else's, then you want to do that. I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't know that having the blue check makes everybody goes, oh, Kevin's a better person than I thought. I should network with him or follow him, or I just don't know. But there is going to be a way they're going to do it, and that's what I read recently. And I was going to be, following that information, and I won't dismiss it. I'll still do it. So I don't know more than that. On LinkedIn, the obvious things that I'd be thinking about are, I know it sounds stupid, but a lot of people's profiles aren't very good. When they go back to their first job during law school, do they describe what they learned from it, why they took the job, and who they mentored with, type of thing. I look at stuff like that. I look at that for every job. And somebody that says they were at a law firm from 2000 to 2006, it doesn't say anything other than that. That means they don't care about their LinkedIn profile. It's just, they don't care. They're just sloppy. They got their tie hanging over the back. They got one shoe on. I know they don't think that way because they're just looking around and seeing everybody else has it. But I'm looking for that thread of passion that goes all the way through as to what they did, and the same thing for the information at the top. This is why I like being a lawyer. This is why I like doing what I do. Here's some of the challenges I face. This is what I'm trying to do, in that regard. It shows you they care about what you do. So that's a layup. The other obvious things are, and I share the story all the time with Jeff Nowak, who writes on FMLA. And he said, blogging is not what it used to be. You need to get it out there and share on social media. If you write a blog post and didn't do anything more, it'd be like writing it and staying on first base, even though you hit a home run. So he is all the time sharing his blog post on LinkedIn, as am I. But what I'd be doing is I wouldn't be linking it, just providing a link, expecting people to see your visual and the link and come to your blog, because they ain't doing it unless you're just a rock star. Because I just don't go to other places on the net to try to read content. I am busy enough, and it just didn't become part of my thing. I want to read it right there where I found it. And so if you got to get the gist of your blog post. So if you can put the entire blog post in LinkedIn, great. If you need to scrape away certain parts of it, that's fine too. But give people the entire essence of the blog post right in LinkedIn. And it's not just the content. You want to be thinking about, what does LinkedIn think of who you are, what you do, how do people respond to you, how do they look at you? All the algorithms are going to do is build up that constantly. And the other thing you're looking for is individual lawyers. And they shouldn't go at the firm site. They should go at the individual lawyer site. They should be thinking about who's liking and who's commenting, and how can I meet those people? Because when somebody likes it, you don't want to just smile and say, this is cool, somebody liked it. What you want to be thinking is, well, I could reach out and connect with that person, because LinkedIn got that post in front of somebody that might have an interest in this area. It wasn't random. And now you've seen somebody like it. You looked at their background, you go, they're kind of interesting. I think I'll drop them a note and say, hey, if you don't mind, I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn. It looks like we have similar interests, similar cities, whatever it might be. We should talk sometime. We should get together for coffee. I responded to somebody and I said, we should get together for coffee, but it's going to be a long time. And her response was, no, we can get on a Zoom call and have coffee. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is pretty amazing. All that happened was pushing a button, on LinkedIn. Same thing in the comments. Don't just read the comments. Maybe you want to just reach out to people. This has never been a better time to use the internet and do what you thought was awkward, because everybody is bored out of their minds. They don't even know the level of boredom that they've reached, because they've accepted it. We have reached this level of not going out of the house for a lot of time that we used to. We just don't. We don't get to walk into an office, say hey to somebody. We don't get together with our team all the time in the same way. We don't meet somebody for a beer. So I don't think we realize how much we crave it. So we crave this type of social interaction, and it can come on the net. So use it, for those type of things. I'm a big believer that all of this social media is personal. It's not necessarily the firm. So I don't know of firms that will say we have bumped our revenue by a certain amount because we do this well on Facebook, or we do this well on Twitter, or this well on LinkedIn. I'm sure there are some, but I do know hundreds of lawyers that have bumped the revenue significantly by understanding how to use the internet, with a combination of blogging, and social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, those type of things. The last thing, I mean, I was just going to mention this Clubhouse thing and what I think is interesting about it. Because it's so new, you have the luxury to tell people, hey, I don't know what this is. I just don't have a clue. But I've been looking at it and it's interesting. And I'm going to go on, tomorrow night at 8. If you want to stop by, I'm going to be talking about this with some other person I invited on and see what happens. And the reason I think that's interesting is it shows that you're curious, and it shows that you look at new things. And I showed it to a friend who I just didn't know, and I think she pinged me and she said, "What do you think of this Clubhouse thing?" And I go, "That's interesting. I didn't think you'd ask me about this." And there was an article in the New York Times on Monday about it, and I said, "I think it could be something. I don't know if it is or not, but I don't dismiss it like other people." I think it was the next morning, and she pinged me and she goes, "I am listening to this great program on on social justice, nonprofit issues in Africa by this leader in nonprofits." She goes, "It's great." She goes, she goes, "Why aren't you guys using this?" This is a person outside the law. They're not in the law, but they have a passion for nonprofit work in the States and internationally. And they're telling me that I should be using Clubhouse. That's interesting, because I think sometimes we're the last to see things. And it doesn't mean we need to do all these things. We can't go everywhere. I don't use Instagram. I watch other lawyers use it tremendously well. I watch, Despina Carson. She was she's been the chief marketing officer at Latham. I forget which lady at Jones Day. These are major firms. She uses Instagram to network within her business community and business leaders internationally and in New York. And she usually is talking about feeding the homeless in New York, and pictures of of what they're doing, and that is moving. You don't forget that. I think more of her because of that. So everybody does different things. Any questions anybody has on anything, so I can save my voice? They want to make one up. That's what we should have done, Michelle.
All right,
I'll make a note of that last time.
I'll ask you a question.
Go ahead, Rick.
No new social media should be ignored. That's my view, because in 2005, I heard a very engaging speaker in Chicago who was saying, "You have got to get a blog if you're a lawyer, and you got to go look at this site called TypePad." And I was up there because I wanted to increase my practice. I was a middle-aged lawyer and I was a solo, and I had trouble getting clients because I'm in the office all the time. And now 16 years later, oh, and I also laughed when you went on Twitter. I sent you some nasty Facebook posts that, "Twitter, what the hell are you doing, O'Keefe? I mean, this is a useless application, and no lawyer is ever going to use this." Remember that one specifically. And now look at us 16 years later. So when you say, is this new social media site that just has voice going to be something? The answer is it may and it may not, but you better be there when it becomes something. And so that's why my blog really isn't a law blog, as you know.
Right.
Okay. My blog is a blog by a lawyer. Okay. And it tries to be who I really am. And you also know that you and I talk about authenticity. If you're not your authentic self, no matter how embarrassing it may be at times, you're never going to be able to use it to develop a practice. because people are going to know that you're inauthentic, and nobody wants to hire a phony. So it takes some courage to get out there and be who you really are. We're so used to putting on some kind of an act. But if I had one thing to say, I would say use it all. I post my blog post wherever I can, sometimes 2 or 3 times. Sometimes I go back a year later and I do it again. So my idea is you can never, ever, ever use the internet too much to engage with other human beings. And that's just amplified now that we're in a pandemic. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Kevin, for being my guru.
I learned from you, but I mean, your blog, one of the early ones when I found like 3 or 4 bloggers on the law, was Ernie Svensson. Had a blog called Ernie the Attorney, and he was called Ernie the Attorney because he walked into a federal district court as a lawyer, introduced himself, and the clerk said, "Oh, you're Ernie the Attorney," and she laughed at him. But he blogged on what interested Ernie. He picked up some major clients as a result of that. It was almost like he was playing golf. He didn't need to be, talking about the law. He just happened to be out at the golf course by the fact. And here's a guy that decides that because he has a name, that because all the internet is down in New Orleans, he's going to broadcast news reports on the hurricane, on Katrina, via a Kindle, because he could get signals on that. But he had become that well known. Not going to get into all the details. I mean, Rick and I don't even have a business relationship. He's not a customer of Lexbox or anything, but because he's doing what he's doing, one day on Facebook a long time ago, I see something that says that he's at a healthcare center. So I'm wondering what's going on. And I dropped him a note. You tell me to stop, Rick, if I'm getting into something, but I find out his first wife was a very serious condition. And I felt the obligation to drop a note. We ended up on a phone call, encourage him, it's gonna be all right. And it kind of felt like it gave me a purpose to life to kind of do those things. Then did the same thing with Danny Schwartz, with his wife that did survive, very serious cancer and multiple surgeries. And unfortunately, my wife became, a victim of cancer. But Rick was one of the first people there, and he was also might have been one of the first people there on the next morning, or the Monday morning, saying, "You will see the sun again, as bright away as you've ever seen it before. You just can't see that right now. I just needed to let you know that." Well, that's the real stuff of life. And so not only does social media, you get relationships for business purposes, but you get relationships for life that you need. Facebook has turned around to allow me to help other people that have loved ones that have cancer, that have lost loved ones to cancer, lost children, lost spouses, lost parents. And it puts it right up on the top of my page. And that is phenomenal. And it's got me to even write about it in an open and honest way, telling our story. And the feedback I get from other people is that, can you please keep doing that? You're helping me, just to share your very personal story. And we're past the time, but person yesterday just dropped me a note, and she says, your post about the financial affairs and not wanting to deal with it after the loss of a spouse. She goes, "That's my father is dealing with that. We just lost mom, and he is so stressed." And he goes, "I am going to give him your post and tell him not to worry about that stuff until he feels he's ready for it." You're reading this and you're going, "That's good stuff." So it's not just the, how do I get the next client? It can also be, how can I do things that people should do, maybe as a lawyer? That's kind of, I look at it too, because lawyers should serve, some noble role. If we have some writing skills, if we have communication skills, if we know how to listen, differently than other people, we can use them, in this fashion. So I've found that very, rewarding, and the algorithms connect you in this odd way. Anything else you want to know, Stuart?
I've enjoyed the conversation. I guess my one question might be, other than Clubhouse, what's new? What's where maybe is the better question of where on social media would you promote differently? I mean, in all candor, Twitter's been great for me for a variety of reasons. And again, as you know, and others may, a very discreet, small, blog in terms of, this is a niche inside of a niche, green building.
Right.
But it works. I mean, in terms of the thought leaders, the regulators, the people in the business sector. And I would say that the majority of them, certainly, a lot of it is, generic searches through Google and the like. But I would say that certainly the best general social media source has probably been Twitter, where people reach out to me. And it continues to be. I mean, I heard from a regulator at a federal agency who's actually, she's awaiting appointment in the new administration, who was apparently doing some research about the field and had read some of my stuff and reached out to me through Twitter just last week. So, but I'm wondering what's new. What other than Clubhouse, is there something else new out there?
What do you think, Michelle? I mean, I've got some ideas, but not really.
Yeah, I was honestly just like thinking that myself when you asked that, Stuart. There's not really much that pops to my mind that's especially big, like in terms of social media and sharing. I mean, I kind of just stick to the basic, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn.
The audio, audio feels like it takes more work, but it really doesn't. And it's very easy to push a button and talk at a machine and have that stored at YouTube. So something, and I haven't done it, but I'm probably going to. It was something my previous CEO said. Kevin, do you understand that YouTube is right behind, like Facebook and traffic? It's the #1 search engine in the world, or #2, right behind Google. And so when people do a search on something, it comes up. So then you have a little library of stuff that's just, Stuart Capital on such and such. And you just give titles to each one. And maybe just 5 minutes. You just wanted to share it. Could be each Friday you could talk into a machine and just store it. And I think that can be very effective because we don't know. We hear a lot about podcasts, but it takes time. You got to set it up. They're exploding. People, and I think it can't be lost on us that there's a pandemic. So what we do has changed. Do people go get on a Peloton and listen to a podcast because they can't get out of their house? Maybe. I look at the athletes because I look at that. I see them use Instagram to share their entire stories. They put out a damn press release, on Instagram, and it's a good question because I get asked that, and I'm kind of parochial to these things.
It's a real issue.
Clubhouse it was $10 million from Andreessen and Horowitz's venture capital firm. Okay, so they're going to be on there, but I believe they picked up another 100 million, and pretty soon they're going to have a lot of money. And Andreessen and Horowitz are smart people. If they think this is going to be something, and they might be on a race because Facebook thinks they want to do something now too. Either Facebook will do it and it'll gobble it up, but that's an interesting thing when you think about it, to just pick a time and to let people know that you'll be there. Anybody can come and talk. Anybody can come and listen. You don't need to talk. Right. You could have like I listened to Andreessen and Horowitz. They talk with each other, and it's just wild stories. He goes, "Can I tell the story about what Bezos said this time, and he met with us on this or that?" He goes, "Okay, you can tell." And you're hearing this, and you're going, "This is pretty interesting." At night, so they're just picking random. It wasn't random. I think they're wired to Pacific time, but I think that's fascinating because then the people that they get an alert that you're on, and right. They're interested in you. And I don't think there's anything wrong to, inviting a few key friends to Clubhouse, because you'll get these things that'll say you can invite 2 people or something like that. And I was pretty transparent with people with social media. I said, I don't even understand how this works, but it looks like it could be something. So here's, here's an invite. But the minute that I went on Twitter, because people were asking my opinion on Clubhouse on Twitter, I said, you can ask my opinion, but I've never been there. I said, if somebody's got an invite, can you send me one? So Molly McDonough, the former ABA Journal editor, and Jack Newton, CEO and founder of Clio, responded. But immediately I realized, well, that's interesting. So these are the people that are using this thing. Jack's not an idiot. He's going to be, he's probably operating close to $1 billion operation already in 10 years. Smart guy, understands how to use social. He must think this is something. So that's the, it's the one I can think of. We may quote you on that Twitter thing. That's an interesting thing because people still don't believe that it could be real. But I just watched Greg Siskine, I think it was 2 days ago. He's basically asking the people, the congresspeople, and their staff people, can you get me the first drafts that are coming out about the immigration so I can get you the comments you want to get from me on Twitter? Because he knows he's basically talking to them. And he's not trying to lobby it, whatever. They're going to want his input. But he's going right to Twitter. I mean, it's not a phone call. It's not a letter. It's not a, you have all of these people in DC. They issue their statements, official statements on Twitter. But yet there's lawyers and law firms that it's not there yet for them. So I laud you for that.